Dear learners, in the last two classes, you have got an idea about what is review of literature and how we have to plan review of literature for a dissertation or a research paper or for your PhD work. So, for a UG student is concerned, you might be thinking why I am explaining all these things to you. It's so deep and you may not require such kind of discussions at this stage. But young learners, my advice to you all is develop the spirit and passion towards research. You start reading books and relevant research publications. Start noting down the points. It will help you to develop your skills in writing. So, in today's lecture, we will be going minutely into how you can plan your reading and how you can develop your argumentation skills. I mean writing. When you write, how you can develop your arguments and what matters in scientific writing. Let us start. In broad, we will be covering 4 areas of interest in review of literature: reading process, elements of analysis, that when we use reasoning, developing reasoning, argumentation. Argumentation here means how you can structure your sentences that conveys a specific meaning. Traditional review of literature, a brief into the way how traditional review of literature is done. So, by now you must have read lot of books. I just wish to quote a book which I liked a lot, Huckleberry Finn, written by Tom Sawyer. A recent news I came across shows a book titled James, which is available in the market right now. It is almost a similar story of Huckleberry Finn. This is about a story of a young boy who live in United States, who had a very bad childhood, whose childhood was suffering with poverty and other issues. So, now when we read books, there are books of different categories. Some are fictions, some are crime stories, or some may be romantic novels, so and so. So, what matters here is how the author developed the content. And when we think about research, think about the topics that we are reading, think about the books that you are referring. These all have some common aspects. Look at this slide carefully. See, a statement or a paragraph, in broad a book which contains a number of small areas of interest. Some may be talking about problem area. There can be questions as well. To address these questions, there could be techniques, and these techniques are justified in some way, and this justification coming out with evidences or individual's perspective on addressing a problem can be found. There could be definitions in the text. There would be the ethical stand of the person reflected in the book. The way an individual is thinking, that we can identify through the writing, and we may also come across number of arguments. And in some books or some research material, we may find proposal of a theory. So, learners, let us figure out what contains a research report or a material that we are referring. We have to carefully look at these points, and these are the points which help you in your research work. So, 2-3 important points I flag here is, one is the conclusion aspect. What is the conclusion of a particular work? How the author concluded the entire mega work which they have done. What kind of hypotheses were formulated to address the problem? And what is the standpoint at the end, how the individual researcher present the topic after completing the research. This particular conceptual understanding is given by Hart in his book Doing a Review of Literature, published in 1998. So here I would like to note some points. So one is the purpose of the work, purpose of the study. And number two is the scope, focus of the study area, unit of analysis, sampling strategy, data collection process, analysis method, justification of the findings, ethical issues addressed. So I noted down around 10 different points related to doing review of literature. So this is for the benefit of all PhD scholars, and for students who are in the master's level, it would be highly helpful for you. So let us go with one by one. If we are using MS Word, all of you might be having access to computer, or you may have your personal laptop as well. When you read a material, especially research material, highlight with different colors and give a comment at the end. You can insert a comment in MS Word. That the aim of the research is like this. Then the author used a particular theoretical stand, that theory. And then you can say the hypothesis, the formulation of hypothesis. Then about the sampling strategy, the sampling framework, and the unit of analysis. Then the software used for analysis and the method used for analysis. Writing the details from analysis and presenting the findings. Why I say this is very important? Because when you start writing, you may be in a fix how I should present it. For example, writing a hypothesis in different formats, different, you may find a different way it is presented. Some people use a diagram, some people write it, some people write alternative and null hypothesis. So if you have the material at your end which you find useful or identical, matching with your work, follow the same. Sampling process and sampling unit defining is one of the challenge I find with many researchers. So how the particular researcher identified the sampling framework? Imagine we have a huge geographical area. So a particular sampling strategy, does it follow probability sampling, or the researcher used non-probability sampling? And next phase comes, whether it is qualitative data collection or quantitative data collection, survey method, yeah, interview method. So identifying the respondents, what justification is given? Because when you write all this in your work, you have to quote such sites, you have to quote such works. When you send your paper for review, or if you send your dissertation, somebody can ask question, on what basis you identified this respondent is appropriate for your study, or this argument, the claim that you are making at the end of the research is justifiable. Because remember, your research is read by many people, so they can question it. So you at the end you will not be in a condition to defend at times. So make it easier, go through the terms, and in the folder which you are using, you start working like this. If you have a software like NVivo, Atlas TI, MaxQDA, these are the softwares which can be helpful in your literature review too. So when you create a table and when you flag such items, it will be easy for you to access and refer it in your particular work. So when you are going through a textbook or a reference book, the book might be having 500 pages or 400 pages. It is very voluminous, and it is not easy to complete a book within the time limit if you have other works to do. So what we do, we skim and scan. The term that we use is scanning the book, which you find interesting titles, the interesting chapters, and if you have kind of a particular observation, note down in that book, and also make sure that you search the logic, the way the author is convincing the readers by using a particular language and standpoint. So another point suggested by Hart is mentioned in this slide. It speaks about the elements for analyzing reasoning in a research is the point of view of a researcher on highlighting the aims and purpose, how a researcher is presenting the aims, and as a fresh researcher, when I look at literature, I closely go through the aims of the previous researcher and the focus of the research, whether is it in the same line with the aims, because you find that the continuity of a research, it goes from level to level. So the aims and purpose, that focus is continued to methodology and the collection of evidence, then the style of presentation of the evidence and the phenomena identified, then the issues raised. The issues can be related to policies, issues can be related to ethical or social issues, and what references the author used. So for a researcher is concerned, if you look at these points, these are the points that you can critically look into, because we say review of literature is, it should be done critically, whether the argumentation of the researcher is acceptable in your case, in your context. So you have to logically present it, and that is only possible when you are looking at the research with a proper reasoning. Hart says that we have two components in an argument. Yes, we are talking about argumentation. Argumentation means when we write a line or a sentence, what that statement mean? That are you making a point? This is question number 1, and your point is supported by evidence. See, a research work is justified if you give evidence. You cannot make tall claims. If you just make claims and if you don't have evidence, you cannot say it is researched material. So two movements Hart proposes. One is point to reason and second is evidence to conclusion. Just imagine that you are working on a project and you want to make a summary of your observations. We find in many cities lakes are being polluted, water bodies. So how do you write the statement? You can just generalize it. You can say that due to excess pollution, the quality of the water is now degraded. The contamination happening through different factory outlets or other sources that pollute the water body. So you should have a point to reason and that evidence where it comes from. Whether your observation is supported with the evidence, the water quality have you checked, or any research laboratories they came out with any such findings. Just making claim is not appropriate in research writing. Three terms which I want to highlight before you. One is assertion, second is inference, and third one is supposition. assertion, inference, supposition. These three terms are important part of any argument. So, people at times say, I am confident that that particular incident happened. Now, we have to doubt at times whether that is having any factual information or not. So, if somebody says something without or with evidence, that declaration you can say that is assertion. Now, what is then inference? Somebody observes that particular assertion and you can interpret some knowledge out of that, that becomes inference. So, inference is one degree above to assertion because it is giving you some element of knowledge. And the last one is supposition. So, here supposition means an assumption, and that assumption is what is not or what is not a case. So, this is a little complicated in understanding. So, it is just an assumption about if something is there or something is not there. So, three different point of view, and when we present our arguments, what we give priority? We should give just assumptions, putting our assumptions in order, or we are making statements that is in the form of declaration, and these statements whether that comes out as an outcome, it gives some knowledge basis or not. So, these 3 points normally taken care by researcher while writing summaries or discussions. So, social science is having diverse perspectives. It has more possibility of argument and people do debate in it because of the subjectivity is concerned. So, social scientist, tourism is also treated under social science. So, we have complexities and we have diverse perspectives. So, researchers present their views. So, their arguments, their claims, these are rooted in assertions or inference or suppositions. So, from this heart comes into a conclusion of dividing research into two, that is deduction process or induction process. Deduction process happens when the researcher approach a problem with a clear theoretical stand. It is termed as a priori. That means that theory is existing and the outcome will be as per the theoretical propositions. And in case of induction, it is reverse. The researcher is experimenting the phenomena and the researcher is convinced after going through the real life situations and coming out with the observation. And the term used here is post priori. So, both the ways we are identifying evidences. So, in a way, induction we have a collection of evidence and we are adding our contribution to it, and in deduction we are using the existing theory to approve or disapprove a fact. So, argumentation analysis, normally this is done in linguistic studies too. Being a researcher, we have to pay extreme attention to our writing, because how to develop your writing skill if your argumentation is strong, using appropriate terms and supported by evidences, people appreciate it. So, learners, pay attention to this argumentation part. Let us go once again in detail. One is a claim, that a statement which can be arguable with or without a fact. Second one is evidence, where you have a backup that something is happening and you have the evidence to it, and because of that evidence you support the claim. Third one is claim and evidence. This is linked by warrant. And the fourth one is backing up. That means the context that you use, that context is supporting the validity of the warrant and evidence. So, I have given you one example here. During summer, you can see tourist movements to hill stations are increasing, and you find traffic jams, hotels fully booked, but ultimately the local people also suffer because of these traffic issues, and hill stations like Shimla, there is a water shortage, and at times newspapers highlight the local people protest because they don't get enough water, where the resorts or hotels they get plenty of water. So now when I am looking at this aspect without knowing the fact, just reading the newspaper highlight, I come to a claim that tourism is damaging the ecosystem, or tourism is creating problem to the local people, right? The claim is like this. I am arguing that tourism is creating problem to the local people in terms of water related issues. So what is the evidence? If you are going to be a serious researcher, you have to use evidence from the available literature, and that evidence should be backed appropriately. You have to specify the context. The context is the weather conditions. You have to understand the plains near to Shimla, like Delhi, Chandigarh, or say other cities. There are huge population residing there. They are looking for a breath, and they want to move to the nearest hill station. So that encourages the movement, and most of them have their own four-wheelers. The road condition is very good. So the contextual aspects we have to be like looking into and come out with the final claim. And in that case, we have to also look into the type of claims that we are making. That is, one is called fact. Fact can be proven. Here the fact is, imagine during the month of May, the temperature at plains go to 44 degree, and Shimla it can be 24 degree or 20 degrees. So that movement, people are attracted to low temperature. Next one is values. When we use values in our claim, you cannot prove that. It is as simple as that. It is individual. Then there are certain statements which say a policy. It is rather than what is doing, what ought to be done. What you have to do in the next 4 years, next 2 years, like that. Then certain statements are related to concept, means it is more related to theoretical definitions. And some of the claims that is related to the interpretation or certain aspect. So we can divide claims into fact, values, policy, concept, interpretation. So why this classification is required? Because when we do argumentation analysis, we should see claim and evidences are linked with warrant or backing. The backing is very important because that support the validity of the warrant and evidence. As a researcher, your responsibility is from the starting till end. When you make each sentence, you should have the confidence that it is not a just claim without evidence or without any valid reference. So that is the reason we find in many research papers a number of in-text citations. So what are the challenges for a researcher here? When people get projects evaluation, dissertation evaluation, what teachers do? They check whether the claim made by the researcher is justified or not. The conclusions drawn by the researcher is logical or not. Whether the researcher is followed appropriate data collection strategies. The evidence drawn from the analysis, is it appropriate or realistic? Being a researcher or a student who is doing dissertation, make sure that you should think logically about the problem, and when you make statements, when you present your statements and arguments, that arguments should be backed by evidence and warrant, and that facts, like, it should be testable, so that you can defend your thesis or you can defend your research paper or even your dissertation very well. Now let us go to another area which is part of this lecture, that is doing traditional review of literature. So what earlier people did, the researchers used to compile the documents, the literature sources, then they organize it according to their, the criteria which they follow. One may be chronologically, the year which publications are done, and second is thematically, the themes appeared in such researches. So traditional review of literature, which deals in general with what is published already, and the researcher is narrating or just describing the summary of each research paper and trying to relate it with his original studies. So the traditional review of literature shows what is already available in the domain and the strength and weakness of the research highlighted, or just using own wisdom. There is no scientific criteria followed. It is the wisdom of the researcher who write the summaries and compare it with other researchers, how the gap is identified, again narrating, developing themes and arguments after doing the literature review. So no systematic process is involved in all this process. So the researcher may be doing because the resources available at his end is limited, or he has limited knowledge or she has limited knowledge to conduct it in a systematic way. As usual, we can find the recent development is very important. So describing the recent developments and positioning the study accordingly using the available frameworks or methods, that is done in traditional way a researcher pursue the literature review. The questions coming in three different areas, that is the coverage of the subject, depthness of the review and structure of the review. At present, researchers use different systematic methods which we will be discussing in the next class. So this critical question you have to address if you are going with a traditional review of literature. So let us see a researcher, he starts his journey knowing to unknown, or what is available and what is unknown, then identifying the contrasting and contradictory areas, try to come out with the synthesis by presenting the arguments in the form of like issues, gaps, etc. So this is presented in narrative form or more descriptive in nature, and the selection of the database, the selection of the articles, or the way the review is done, there is no scientific process involved in it or any methods or frameworks followed. So I wish to show how you can read an abstract as an example. This is the last part of this lecture. I have given here an example of my research. If you go through the slide, you find different colors, the word sentences are highlighted. So you can identify argument, you can identify the claims, and this will also explain you what is presented, the methods or the outcomes. Let us conclude what we discussed today. We started with the taxonomy, I can say the taxonomy proposed by Hart on identifying the core elements in a text. That includes concept, theory, framework, positioning, point of view, arguments, claims, a number of terms which is a matter of interest for a researcher. And in continuation, we have seen how you can structure a sentence, what points you have to look into shaping the arguments, and we studied three different terms: assertion, inference, supposition. And further we have seen how claims can be fit into your context, the type of claims, and at the end we have quickly gone through a traditional review of literature style, which I will explain in the coming lecture in detail when we are going with a different type of literature review. As an example, I have given you how to read an abstract. By looking at the abstract, what points you can pay attention, and this particular session in general be helpful for you if you want to develop your writing skills. So dear learners, take a copy and pen, start writing on something, and at the end, while you complete it, you go through each sentence, how these sentences are related, what claims that you are making, whether that sentences are having assertions or inference or the supposition element. So yourself can identify it better. I conclude this lecture here. Thank you for your patient listening, and I hope this session was useful for all of you. Thank you.